Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, and welcome to another episode of Buffalo Bills, Maybe Next Year, the podcast which I will be coordinating this week, but per Buffalo Bills rules, we're going to have to just switch coordinators again next time we go up because we can't stay with the coordinator more than, 1 week. Not unlike the Bills seem to be able to stay with an offensive coordinator for more than 1 year. That seems to be the limit on it. I think there's a statute of limitations. It's like a congressional term, if you will. So, but hopefully the whole operation doesn't shut down like things tend to do here in DC. So that's government-related humor, which the three of us will love and our listeners aren't going to care about. But what the hell? Anyway, I'm Paul.
I'm Scott.
I'm Frank.
So that was the Bills, as you may have noted, have switched offensive coordinators yet again. Now, this isn't necessarily a negative. We've talked all year and complained all year about Rick Dennison. Some moments of great creativity, some excellent first halves, followed by consistently terrible second halves and not taking advantage of personnel and calling stretch runs to Mike Tolbert and other such issues. So we'll start off. I guess we'll start off talking about Dennison being out, and then we'll go into Brian Daboll and his background being in. So we'll start with Frank on this, talking about Rick Dennison, your impressions of, was this a good move? Should they have been more patient with him and gotten him a type of franchise quarterback? Or was it just evident that he was not an effective play caller, not a good maximizer of his personnel, and this was the right move?
Well, I think you got to remember back to the beginning that Rick Dennison wasn't their first choice last year anyway, I think. If I remember right, another and then that guy got a different job, and whoever they wanted, I forget who it was.
Mike McCoy,
right? And so I think that in order to have kept his job, he would have really had to shine. And I think that throughout the year, the offense had tons and tons of problems, and certainly there is a scheme versus talent issue, but Paul highlighted some of the issues. There were some bad play calls, which is not just, an occasional thing, but there was sort of a bad philosophy. There seemed to be an inability to adjust after halftime. As good as they came out at the beginning of some games, they really couldn't, first of all, score on those first drives, but then second of all, had a real issue moving the ball in the second half throughout the whole year, including in Jacksonville, where if you listen to that podcast, I felt like they had a pretty good game plan about getting Tyrod out of the pocket and doing stuff. Some of that to me was on Tyrod for not, continuing,
not executing,
right, and not executing and taking what he could get. And some of that was the second half they didn't adjust. And sure, Jacksonville has a good defense, but it's not like Pittsburgh didn't score 41 last week either. So there was certainly room for offensive improvement that was beyond what the play calling was. I think the other thing to keep in mind is if the Bills have a handle on what they want to do at quarterback and what they feel is possible to be done at quarterback, Dennison might simply not fit what it is they think they are going to get. And so that is certainly my thoughts on Rick Dennison, that I'm not going to really, I feel bad a guy's out of a job, but my guess is he'll end up being a line coach or whatever he did before, offensive coordinator before this. And Brian Daboll's going to get a job. He's played on some, my initial thought was he was a coach in the SEC, which doesn't really throw the ball very much. And his offenses have been pretty terrible in the NFL. So I really have and had some concerns. Some of those have been eased, I would say. I don't want to say I feel better or good about the hire, but it's eased me that more than one person has said his plan on offense was to get the ball to the most dynamic playmaker, and he didn't really have a philosophy of, run to set up the pass or pass to set up the run. It was, who's our best player? How can we get the ball in their hands? And I think that included, Ben Watson in Cleveland, which really speaks to the level of talent in Cleveland when he was there. But if I remember right, it was also Detroit and Calvin Johnson, he was the big receiver that he got his hands on. Anyway, there was a couple of people that okay, that makes sense. And that seems to be a good and different way to run an offense. And so I was at least hopeful that, whoever is on the offense next year, this is a guy who, and another feather in his cap, has been hired more than once by Bill Belichick. That certainly speaks to something. So they also didn't waste any time in hiring him. They 24 hours, they pretty much knew who they wanted. So some of those things speak in his favor. I'm still concerned that I haven't seen any sort of finished or great product from him. That really wasn't going to be a guarantee of success anyhow. But that's my initial thoughts on Dennison and Daboll.
All right, Scott, what are your thoughts on the switch at coordinator?
So, I mean, obviously there's a lot to agree with what Frank said. Certainly there's I'd say the biggest thing for me was the inability to not improve after halftime. I mean, I think they say that that's one of the biggest differences you can see in a well-coached team and a not as well-coached and coordinated team, is that in halftime, somebody goes in and makes adjustments, and then if the game starts changing, it's because one team's adjustments were better than the others. And it seemed consistently that we were not making the better adjustments. So that's definitely something that concerns me. I think, to a certain extent, I do, to me, this is an important point, not just for Dennison and obviously like his career, but we have to, in the grand evaluation of the Sean McDermott kind of Brandon Beane timeline, this is kind of considered a negative point. I mean, again, it's not overwhelming. It's not one that we can't, he's had other positive ones, but I think this is one that I also to a certain extent put on him, because I mean, yeah, you can have a number one guy, and if it's McCoy, that's one thing. It's odd that I think McCoy is available now and they didn't go after him. So I don't know why they feel Daboll is that much better than the guy they thought they had going for last year. But I would say that McDermott does have to own his coordinator hires, and given that he's already jettisoned one of them after a year, that to a certain extent shows the guy. I think, to me, like, I'm not in love with Daboll. He was basically coaching for the 33rd NFL team, the one that's headquartered in Tuscaloosa, and only plays college opponents for some reason. But them winning games is not dependent on the coaches, or it's not dependent on the schemes that they run. Let's just put it that way. It's mostly dependent on the fact that they have better athletes than 99% of the people they play. So I think it's going to be a different offense that he's going to run when he gets to us, because we're not going to have the same personnel. Obviously, we don't even know who we're going to have a quarterback. We will get to that in a minute, obviously. But I think, I mean, obviously, if he's a guy who can get the ball to McCoy, that's great. But I think we've kind of proven that this year that's not enough. And I think, even as much as we'd like to say that, a defense can get you in the conversation, and a run game will help with that, getting the quarterback to be part of the solution and not part of the problem is ultimately like the offensive coordinator's kind of biggest responsibility and the team's biggest responsibility. So, we'll see what happens. We'll give him a shot. And, I don't know if I was in love with any of the other candidates that were out there. I think McCoy was one. I think they were saying like Jim Caldwell was one. I do like having guys who were like former head coaches being your coordinators, because I think that gives them a little better perspective. But I could see why you wouldn't want Jim Caldwell, because he's Jim Caldwell. So
fair enough. Yeah. So Dennison, I mean, this is, and you both hit on some of the salient points I was going to mention about him on the, it's a tough decision to make. He was limited by his personnel. One thing I mentioned last week is Tyrod Taylor really seemed to, yes, he's always had limitations, but he really seemed to regress on the deep ball. And there were a few plays in Jacksonville and throughout the season where if he'd hit a deep ball that was there, it would have changed the complexion of the game. And he missed two of them in Jacksonville. The Bills were the only team, by the way, in the regular season to not hit a pass play of 50-plus yards the entire season. So that limited him. There were no other running backs on the roster that could stretch the field laterally except for McCoy. You're obviously not looking for LaShawn McCoy too, but Gillislee could do that. Carlos Williams, to a degree, could do that. He did not have that on the roster, at least no one who could stay healthy, even though we saw it a little bit out of Cadet. And on one play from Tywan Jones, where he was able to stretch field laterally, had a ragtag band of wide receivers, limited personnel, scrap heap pickups. Jordan Matthews was hurt most of the year, and he had about 60% of an offensive line. He did not really have a great complement of 5 players up front that could play off each other, as well as the fact that continuity becomes an issue, and now you've gotten various personnel used to the system, the way plays are called, the nomenclature of it, and now you've got to start over. All of that said, I'm in agreement with you both that I think this was the right decision to make. Continuity only goes so far as, if you're going from where you see areas of improvement, and there weren't areas of improvement. We saw this offense regress notably under his leadership. We also saw coaches who are able to get the same type of production or better production out of less. In fact, you have to go all the way back to the Dick Jauron era to find an offense that did less than this offense. And even 3 of those 4 offenses under Jauron did much, much better than this offense did. And those offenses did not have LeSean McCoy, nor did it have, 3 good offensive linemen. They had Jason Peters, and that was about it at that point in time. So, there was enough personnel that there should have been, better production. Scott pointed out, how bad this team was in the second half, the total inability of these teams to, do anything in the second half of, games. And that's going to come back to haunt you. And it did in Jacksonville. We saw them get away with it against Kansas City, against Indianapolis, and against some other lesser teams. But when you get into the playoffs, all it would have taken was, 8 points at any time during that second half. And right. we'd be talking this week instead about how the team just got destroyed by the Patriots. Right.
Even just scoring that touchdown that, at the goal line.
Yeah, when they got to the goal line to score there would have been huge. So all of those are reasons why I agree with the dismissal. A little bit on Daboll as background, and obviously Frank and Scott covered some of this already. One thing we did mention, he is a Buffalo area native. Went to school in Buffalo. He was from Welland, Ontario, which is just outside of Buffalo.
Is that important to you guys at all? Does that make you feel better about this hire?
I will say, and Frank disagrees, which is great. I would say it helps at least in terms of knowing the culture that he is getting into, whereas a lot of players seem to be surprised by the fact that it's very much like a college football town, players and coaches. He'll have that understanding. But I think Frank was about to say no in terms of him helping be a better coach. But let's see where Frank is going.
I just was going to say, I suppose it's nice for the local papers to write a couple of local angles. And I guess, I just to disagree with Paul, the culture, how many times has the culture, I guess you'd step into it knowing what the Bills might mean to the area a little better. But that's not really the same as the culture that he's stepping into at work. I certainly don't dislike it. I suppose it's nice for him. I suppose that means, he fully knows what it means to live in the Buffalo area, unlike, I guess, a player or coach might if they had come from somewhere else and they'd be like, wait a minute, this is a little slower or colder than I thought it would be. But, so it's good, I suppose, in that regard to know, but I don't know.
No, I would agree. It's I'll agree on that front, even though I do think there is some benefit to knowing the culture. It doesn't. Let's put it this way: the fact that he was from Buffalo didn't make Corey Graham any better with safety. He did very well in there for years, and I was glad they hired him. But it had nothing to do with him being from Buffalo. Whereas John Cordo, you might remember from Buffalo, New York, linebacker / safety. Played 4 years for some very terrible Bills teams, and it was not all that good, and it didn't have anything to do with the fact that he was from Orchard Park, New York originally. So he certainly got to the stadium on time. He knew the commute better, but otherwise.
He knew that back road. He knew what was the best parking lawn.
Oh yeah, knew the best line. Knew to take California when Abbott was backed up from traffic. Yep. So and this is a perfect time for the sirens to go by in the middle of my spiel. But the other thing is his connections to McDermott date all the way back to their time at William and Mary, which is, not far from here. Well, it's not close to here. It's a couple hours away. But
he played for U of R, right? He was the safety for the University of Rochester, or no?
He was. Yeah, he did. He played college football at University of Rochester.
He was there my first year was his last year. And if I remember right, the football team hadn't won a game for 2 years. So maybe he's better suited for the offense.
That is, and you bring up a good point I'd had here to mention in his his background. When he came into the league, he was a defensive coaching assistant with the Patriots during their early Super Bowl years, and then he moved to the offensive side of the ball, became the receivers coach, and then you'd mentioned, Frank, he was a coordinator for 3 fairly terrible offenses from 2009 to 2012, although they were also horrible personnel-wise with the Browns, the Dolphins, and Chiefs. And then he went back to the Pats for 2013 to 16. He was an offensive assistant and tight ends coach. So he was most recently at Alabama. He was only remembered at Alabama for 1 year, though, so it's not like he had a huge history in the SEC there. He was the offensive coordinator, and they had a heck of a showing in the second half to win the national championship, as you all know. The Buffalo News had a good article I encourage everyone to read, talking about how he really prefers a possession passing game in terms of his offense. Again, I just, rather than recount that article to you, just, give it a quick look up, and you can read about some of the schemes he prefers and how that will help with the offense. So I also want to give a shout out to writer Joe Biscotti, who wrote an article when I was researching this.
I'm doing a bit.
Oh, okay. Let me log out, and then
what we'll do, how about we get started talking about our options, Tyrod, and then you pop back in and we'll let you know where we are.
Sounds good.
All right. So options with Tyrod. Obviously, like, the coordinator is a key position, and the other key position on the offense is the quarterback, Scott. So, I mean, we're here with a handful of things that we could do with our quarterback that just brought us to the playoffs. There is room to cut him. There is room to renegotiate and re-sign him. There is room to you could trade him. You could trade him before or after $6 million is due at the beginning of the league year as a bonus. What do you think they are gonna do with him, and what would you like them to do, Scott?
I think that they're going to cut him. I think that this...
It's funny because the news stories have noted that they would likely trade him or do something with him before they cut him. But really? I've definitely seen,
Oh, I've not. Okay.
That depends on you finding someone who will give you value. Now, clearly, they're willing to take pennies on the dollar, literally pennies on the dollar, when you're talking about the Darius deal. So, right. To me, if you're trading someone for I'm going to say a 5th round pick or below, you might as well be cutting them, because there's no guarantee that's actually going to
and then you're keeping a lot of the money then.
Yeah, that's true on some of it. Yeah, for depending on what how the deal works out. But
you there, Scott?
I think Scott went out a little bit, but he'll come back. This has happened before.
I'm not
there.
Back?
He is. You're not.
There you okay. Yeah, you kind of cut out for a second.
Sorry. Anyway, I think they'll get rid of him one way or another. I guess I'm fine. I think I would prefer to keep him as a bridge, just because we are probably going to go with the rookie. It seems like that's where they, build through the draft. That's the one thing they've been saying over and over. So that makes me think that you have to draft a quarterback, because that's the most important position on the team. And I think
Scott just bounced off on accident, it looks like.
Paul. No. Okay, so I can.
Yeah, you do your thoughts, and I'll get Scott back on the line here.
Right, and then I'll come back to my leadership role until I jubal again.
Government shutdown is affecting everything.
It is, Thought with me being back from Vegas, we'd have our technical issues over with. So yeah, what makes this discussion so interesting is.
Oh, now you're zooling.
Oh, smell, Frank.
All right.
Frank, tell us your thoughts, and
what we're gonna do is you reset, and then I'll just sit here for a minute, and then when you come back on, we'll start over with this whole topic, and maybe I'll edit it, or maybe we'll leave it. We'll see. But I think I'm not going to talk to myself for a minute, and then nobody can respond. Go ahead.
All right, fair enough. I'll hang up. I'll log off Gmail. I'll come back in. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, you're back. Looks like Scott's coming back on now,
And
too.
that's how you get Tom Brady onto the Bills for no more than a third-round draft pick. Somebody got that right.
That's great.
We're live. That's great. We figured it out.
That's great. I was on by myself, Scott. You didn't even know, but Paul started zooming.
Yeah, so I started to zoom again, and then I had to log off.
So I was just quiet for the last minute.
So yeah, I think we'll probably cut that whole thing.
Yeah, it'll be bonus content at the end, if anything. I'll do a little extra editing. All right. So Paul, can you quietly count to 3 or 4 in your head once I stop talking, and then just start us on the quarterback conversation?
Sure.
With Tyrod, and we'll go to Scott first, who will hopefully be able to share with us his feelings.
Who will not break the hangouts again.
Okay.
So moving on to the quarterback scenario and the most awkward transition we've ever had, which is saying something, but it's important to say. So what's interesting to me about the quarterback situation, we'll start with Scott on this, as we tried to do initially. So I think we are in large agreement that, and most Bills fans are, that Tyrod is not a franchise quarterback. But that, no matter what degree you feel on him, you could think like he's a good bridge quarterback. You need to keep him around. You could think, but even if you think that, you could still promote cutting him and then trying to bring him back at a better salary, or trying to restructure a salary, knowing that the demand might not be so high that you could get him for less than the $18 million you'd pay if you don't try to do a restructure. You could also, you also could think he's valueless and should be a backup next year, but you could want him to be a good backup on the roster, so you keep him. So many different ways you could think about the situation. So starting with Scott on this topic, what are your thoughts on what to do in this scenario that the Bills have found themselves in?
So, obviously I think all the tea leaves are pointing to Tyrod out. I think that's going to happen, whether it's a trade or a cut. To my mind, if you're trading someone for pennies on the dollar, like we did with Darius, which was literally pennies on the dollar, then I would say, if you're getting a 5th-round pick back for Tyrod, that you might as well be cutting him, because you're really not getting any value out of it, and you're also going to eat some of that money probably. You're going to eat some of it on the cap hit too, depending on when you cut him. I think that's probably what will happen. I think a better choice is probably to end up drafting a quarterback, just because when you're drafting, they've consistently said they want to build through the draft, and ultimately that is the best chance to get a franchise quarterback, because they are so rare to actually get on the market in a free agent kind of way. So I think they're going to draft a quarterback, and I think you want to keep Tyrod just because I feel like it keeps the momentum of the team going. It's a lot of money, but it's not a long-term deal. I don't know how they're going to spend the amount of cap space they're going to end up with because there's a lot of guys who are probably not going to get brought back just regardless. We'll get to the list of like free agents in a minute here, but I think there's a lot of guys who are not going to be back. They're going to have a lot of cap space. They could use 10 or 18 million of it, whatever it is, on Tyrod and keep him around for another season, and then that lets the 1st-round guy kind of get some some real practice reps at least, and maybe some game reps depending on the situation. And then you kind of know what you have with him to a certain extent. And Tyrod can kind of keep the veterans, motivated and interesting, and keep butts in the seats and everything else. So that's kind of what I would do, but I don't think they're going to go that route.
All right.
Yeah, I think Scott's right about the trade value. You're not going to get much for him because teams will know that, he's due a $6 million roster bonus if he's on the team as of, I think it's like 2 days after the league year starts. And so if you trade before then you're going to, the team's going to have to pay that bonus, whoever acquires him. And if they don't, then the Bills are going to have to pay it. And if you're going to get a 5th or a 6th-round player and you're going to spend $6 million for that privilege, well, that's just goofy. And so most teams know that you're going to cut him, so you're not really going to get anything for him. My guess is, that they will cut him. I think, he did not perform I guess if the only tea leaf that doesn't point to that is the firing of Rick Dennison, where you might say, okay, well, clearly they weren't satisfied with him. Maybe they think that's an indication that they feel he should have gotten more out of Tyrod in the offense. but I think that they view it as a joint blame. They weren't particularly keen to re-sign him last year. Other teams weren't particularly keen to sign him last year. My guess is he'll be cut and he will end up on a team as a backup. There's a few teams that might be able to use him as a starter, but I don't think that they're going to go that way. I think the book is out on Tyrod, and lots of teams that need quarterbacks aren't going to really rush to get him, especially because there are other, free agent quarterback signings that would be available. Kirk Cousins, first among equals this year. And then I guess there's a lot of steam that Alex Smith might be traded, with Pat Mahomes looking to take over the reins in Kansas City. So I think that they'll cut him, and I think they're going to, I think that's probably the right thing to do. I can't see Tyrod playing better than he did. He did play better. This was statistically one of his worst years as a Bill, but I don't really, conceive of him as playing much better. And with regards to butts in the seats, I think that's a fair point, but I think you can get decent amount of veteran presence and veteran play without having to pay what he's going to be owed this year. So the contract was written this way for a reason. So they're going to get rid of him and save some money. And I think that's what I would expect them to do.
Sure, you don't have one more point to make while the siren
siren, and if I could reiterate one more time that sirens are bad and should not be on podcasts.
Yes, I agree. So now that the siren has gone by, I guess I can give my thoughts on this. So I would, I'm partially in agreement with you both. I think he might have some trade value, but as Scott mentions, it might not be very high trade value. What they might want to try to pull is something like they did with Darius, along the lines of, all right, we'll trade Tyrod for a 5th round pick. We'll pick up this much of his salary, whatever it happens to be. I think the rules, of course, say how much salary they're going to pick up. I don't think the teams have much say in it like they do in other sports necessarily.
Yeah, it's not hockey, right?
Or baseball for that matter, too. But I think what inevitably, but they should also try and make incentive like, if Tyrod starts for you, it's a 4th round pick. And if Tyrod starts for you and you make the playoffs, it's a 4th round pick and then a 7th round pick the next year. Something like that. I think they could get some value. And the way this organization likes to hoard draft picks, if you will, I would be fully expecting them to at least try to get some trade value out of him. Of course, as you guys have both alluded to, you need a willing partner to trade, and it's very possible, especially after what most people are remembering when they see him, is his performance in the playoffs and how not good that was. And, they're thinking, look, we've got Bortles, we've got Keenum, and we've got Nick Foles in the championship games. So you can survive without, those are all guys who are better than Tyrod. So let's just, settle with what we have and see if we can move forward until we find a franchise guy. So I think, his value will be tough. So what will happen, and they would have to pay him a roster bonus if they keep him in March, but they save more against the cap if they wait until after June 1 to cut him. I mean, there's so much they can do here. I eventually think they're going to do what they did with Ryan Fitzpatrick and move on. I don't know if it's going to be post June 1 or not. That's something, I just don't have the inside knowledge of, nor does anyone right now, nor do I think McDermott and Bean even know exactly what they're going to do. But I could be wrong there. So it's also possible that if they the reason I think that they'll move on like they did with Fitz is they know he's not fit anymore. Even though he is a consummate professional, as we saw when he was benched for Nathan Peterman, he's a good leader. He's respected. That is very tough to go into, you're going to be a backup on this team that you've led for 3 years and led to the playoffs and have, may have an over 500 record when you start for this team for 3 seasons. I know people say 22-22, but for Christ's sake, please stop counting that Matt Castle 1 snap as him being the starting quarterback in that game against the Colts. So we know he's over, he's really over 500. So but it's going to be difficult for him to want to take a back seat, but I think it's going to be difficult from a continuity perspective to keep him on the roster. Even if he's quiet, the second a new guy struggles, there's going to be rumblings from some of the leaders on the team like, we want to win, and you're putting a guy in here who's not helping us win. So I think with all of those factors in play, it's just going to be very difficult for them to keep him on the roster, even though from a competitiveness perspective, it might behoove them to do so. So I think they'll move on from him as well. I do think they're going to be extremely aggressive in trying to trade him and get at least some value for him, preferably a 5th round pick or higher, when at least you have some chance of success with someone who's not just a roster filler, although the 5th round admittedly is stretching it if you're looking for someone who's not just a roster filler. So, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting few months, and I think it'll transition nicely before we end this discussion, because a lot of our Facebook and Twitter questions, as you guys have noticed, have been on this very topic. So we'll probably transition to those now as we continue on this topic. So let's do that. So we'll look first as I go to the maybe next year page, which I'm doing on my phone, by the way, because I do not want to open more tabs than is absolutely necessary right now. So the first comment from Steven, you go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish you had. I feel like Dennison game planned around the offense he wished he had. I know he didn't have a lot to work with. That was the offense he had. And I think we've covered that already, so we don't need to go too much about. Yeah, we agree.
Donald Rumsfeld quote.
Yes.
Controversial.
Yeah, no, it's we take
known knowns and unknown knowns. Yes. Also known.
We need to add some Nader quotes on this podcast. That's one thing.
Definitely an unknown.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here's Steven's thoughts on the QB situations. Bills have so many holes to fill. I don't want to see them trade away all their draft capital to get a QB, particularly when drafting a QB is at least 50% crapshoot. Off the top of your head, how many QBs picked in the first round can you name who didn't pan out? Hope is not a strategy. But in this case, who said that, by the way, guys? I do not know off the top of my head.
Hope is not a strategy. I think that was Admiral Akbar.
All right. Admiral
there's a lot of people with that one, yeah.
That's actually Vince Lombardi.
Oh, okay.
I think so. The first name that came up was Lombardi. So let me see. Go ahead.
All right. So in this case,
Duke of Lombardi, actually.
Right. I hope their guy, whoever that is, dropped to the mid-teens where he trade up may be more reasonable. I hope so too, though the draft boards right now are showing that. And again, the draft boards now are, I shouldn't say they're meaningless, but they should be taken with a grain of, if not salt, a grain of, maybe pepper, a little bit larger than salt, but not to be taken too seriously. And then Steven, essentially counters that, saying that's a lot of teams may be looking for a QB in this draft, or maybe on the first 6 picks alone, as he points out. We've seen in recent years what the going rate is for one of the top 2 QB picks, and then that Cleveland may be interested in trading down. So, yeah, we didn't really, in the Tyrod discussion moving on, we didn't really talk about the Bills' draft strategy then for quarterback. Any thoughts on, what they want to do? And we'll start with Scott on this one, on what they want to do come draft time, as far as, at least need to get one more on the roster.
I don't know. I think it's really going to depend on the coordinator and what he determines that Peterman can give them. Because I think on some level, like if they determine now that Peterman has played in 2 NFL games, he is now, as far as I'm concerned, a veteran NFL backup, or at least capable of being a veteran NFL backup. I think he's, I don't think. It
looks like Scott is faded out again.
Scott, yeah, you faded. Okay.
All right, he's back now.
Sorry.
There you go.
So as much as we make fun of Peterman for the 5 picks, at least he's a serviceable NFL backup, or he's a guy who knows the system. Well, he knew the system. Now he doesn't even know it. So it's really going to depend on what the coordinator thinks about him. And if he stays, then I don't feel like we need to draft another quarterback unless we want to make him the starter or the heir apparent, so to speak. So I think I'd like to think, again, I said earlier, I think they're going to draft a quarterback, and I think that's what they're going to do. They do have some intriguing kind of veteran free agents out there, but I don't know that any of them have like the ties to McDermott or Bean that are apparently the decisive factor in whether or not you get signed as a free agent for this team. So I think we'll probably end up drafting. I don't want to get into like which one, because it'll just, there's plenty of time.
Right, and so much can change between, I remember when there was a day when Jimmy Clausen was going to the Bills at number 10 at one point in time, way back when. So there's a lot that's going to change the value of these QB. We still have the Senior Bowl to play. There's a lot of things that are going to change.
I disagree a little with Steven that it's a 50%. I mean, drafting a QB is at least a 50% crapshoot. I don't know if it's quite that bad if you're sticking to the first round. I think more quarterbacks, I think if you average out all the rounds, it gets worse because typically third and later quarterbacks don't ever pan out, and you have some second round quarterbacks that pan out. But I mean, there is identifiable talent in the first round, and you can go after that talent and hope for the best. Not just hope for the best, but that's what we're doing with lots of these positions is we can identify some amount of talent and go forward. I am looking forward to them drafting a quarterback. I think they will. I think that they need better than Nathan Peterman as well. I did like certain things about Nathan Peterman. I liked how the football came out quickly and very fast, and I had feelings.
Although I didn't like how when he did that, it usually ended up in the hands
went right into another person's hand.
That tended to be the issue with him. Yeah.
Now, I hope if I was going to really argue for him, I'd say that maybe if there was better offensive line protection, or it wasn't against San Diego that first week, or Jacksonville,
or coming into a playoff game against Jacksonville,
right,
totally cold, and having to be like, okay, you have to lead us to a tie in the playoffs right now, or we're going to lose. Good luck.
Right. So I think you could have put him in a better situation and started him off better, and it would have worked. And I liked how he didn't completely cave, because he did come into the Colts game and played pretty well for a guy.
The Bills won a game he started that game.
And left after a concussion. So, there were things to like about Nathan Peterman, but he's a 5th round guy for a reason. There were clear talent issues and with him, and there was lots more question marks than not question marks with a guy like him, as opposed to a handful of, they're saying as many as 6 quarterbacks available. I think certainly 3 or 4 of them looked very good. Look like there's pretty good consensus that they're good players. And I think that the Bills, I think Steven's right that a lot of teams are going to need quarterbacks this year, and the Bills might have to move up a little to get one, but we'll have to see. My hope is that, Scott doesn't want to name names, but my hope is that Baker Mayfield continues to grab his crotch all offseason, and then they take him, because I like everything I've read about him, and I don't even really care that he grabbed his crotch. So, does that fit with Scott McDermott? I don't know, but we'll have.
Or
to
even
see.
Sean McDermott, for that matter.
Or Sean McDermott. I think if you can,
if he wins the Super Bowl, we'll start getting his name right there.
Exactly. He makes the play. What else does he need from me to get his guy right? I will say that the interview with Bean on WGR, where he basically said that he had seen all the quarterbacks that matter. And I think the other way he said it was quarterbacks that might go in the first round. I think it's clear that they've identified talent that they think is there to take in the first round. My guess and my hope is they have an understanding about what the most they will spend to get that guy is. So they probably know, here are the 4 or 5. This is what we make of these 6 quarterbacks. This is what we think it's worth with regards to moving up. And if you can make one of those deals work, and if not, you do something else. So we'll see. But I'm ready to spend some of the picks now, not just trade them down and trade away. I'm ready to, not be Cleveland and actually just try and acquire some talent instead of acquiring promise of future talent.
Right. There's a Browns podcast that we follow, and I have listened to a couple of episodes. It's called Surviving the Season. And I think one of the frustrating things is not the podcasters, but the kind of the view they present is it's great. We have all these draft picks, but most draft picks, the majority don't pan out. And also the fact that people are high on some players on their current roster. A lot of these players on the roster haven't even won a game in the NFL. So, maybe you see them because they get playing time, they make some plays, but they also haven't made enough to not be one of the 2 winless teams in NFL history. So they got a lot of problems there. Anyway, we're going to skip Steven's question on the holes in the impending free agents. In fact, we'll use that to lead into our next topic. But it's going on to James. He says, assuming we trade up for a QB, which team seems most plausible to trade with? I personally, and you guys can disagree with me, I think it's a little too early to decide that, because we don't know, which teams are making efforts to sign which of their free agents, what they're going to go after. I think it's difficult to know that at this point so early in the process without knowing other teams' priorities. I will bless Scott, and I'll go to Frank. Any thoughts on, teams that might be worth, might be interested in moving down, or do we just not have that knowledge yet?
I think we have a little bit of knowledge, and we're going to have more as it goes along. I think you're going to look at a team like Indianapolis, and if they believe that Andrew Luck's rehabilitated, I don't think they're going to want to draft another quarterback, so they're going to be willing to trade down, or in the alternative, trade Andrew Luck. I think that if the Giants want to keep Eli Manning, they could be talked into being traded down because they wouldn't necessarily need one of the best quarterbacks off the board quite yet. I think a team like, and then there's going to be whoever signs Kirk Cousins won't necessarily need a quarterback. I think because certainly you're not going to spend as much money as he's going to command and then also take a top 6 guy. I don't think. I think you're going to be committed to quarterback. So I think you can name a couple of teams that look like they're probably going to be partners in moving down. The question, as always, will be how much will that cost and how far up will you actually go?
Yeah, I will just jump in on this quickly. I also think, we'll see how the free agency plays out. But I think, to me, and I forget whose draft analysis I was reading, but there's clearly kind of a 1-2 of Rosen and Darnold, and that most people think that those are going to be the first two off the board, and that there's a good chance that they could go 1-2 in some order or another to the Browns and Giants, just because those two teams need quarterbacks, immediately if you're the Browns and soon if you're the Giants. And they both need to, get them right because they're pretty awful otherwise. So I think I think there's an argument that if you think that's how the draft's going to shake out, and we'll see how Darnold and Rosen do in their workouts and the combine and everything else. But I think if you're not going to make a run for those two guys, and I think it's hard too, because I'm not in favor of like trading, doing the Ricky Williams or Herschel Walker, trade your whole draft for one guy thing, even if it's a quarterback, which is the only way it's debatable. Then I'd say that you're really going to have the pick of the next kind of top guys, your Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, guy who's on the edge in that zone is. You can get that anywhere from that kind of 7 to 10 range, because most of those guys, Tampa Bay, Chicago, San Francisco, and Oakland already have pretty established quarterbacks. So I think you can get that for one of the 2 first rounders and then one of the 2 second rounders. I would think that that's a decent deal to let you get your pick of the next tier of quarterbacks.
Right. I think you're a little light on what it's going to cost, but I agree that that's a good range to target, because from Tampa to, like you said, Oakland, not really quarterback. Although, Chicago might be done with Mitch Trubisky already, but they spent a lot to get him last year. So I guess
they'll burn Soldier Field down if they draft another quarterback. Right. They didn't like it last year, so they're not going to like it this year.
Yeah, and I think the Niners will almost certainly franchise, if not sign, Jimmy Garoppolo, because they went out to get him. Oh yeah, and I'm guessing Oakland doesn't want to move on from Derek Carr yet. So
11's the Dolphins, so they might also. I don't think the Bills are going to make a trade with the Dolphins just on anything, just because they're in the division. And then you get to Dalton and Cincinnati, and it gets you're gonna have to take your hopes that whoever you want is still there if you're drafting below 10.
Right.
Right, and of course, all of this is really just postponing the inevitable 2 to 3 years from now when the Bills draft Tua Tagovailoa. And, because that's why they hired Dable.
Playing the long con. Yeah.
So that's what's going to happen.
Trust the process.
Brian, essentially agrees with everything that Steven says. I said, they want to get, if a QB falls, fine. Otherwise, he'd be happy to trade down, get more picks for next year. Steven mentioned, and we'll skip Steven's next question because we addressed on, it seems that they knew exactly who they wanted and what did that say after they let Dennison go. I think it's a good sign. At least they were decisive, and Scott went into some detail on that. And then on Twitter, we had one question from Jesmond. He said, thought, don't trade any picks to get a better QB, too risky, which we just talked about at length. Question, with 3 average poor QBs contesting this year's AFC Championship games, is Tyrod good enough if we improve the rest of the team coaching? I'm going to jump in and say yes, but
have you listened to this podcast before? We have opinions on this.
We have strong opinions about this.
Yeah, so it's I've always felt that he is good enough, but that needs so much room for improvement in other areas. You really, really need to look top grade. It's the same thing with Jacksonville. Just because you've gotten this far, and even if they pull a huge upset and beat the whoever they're playing about, the Patriots, that's right.
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, the New England Patriots or something like that. So, you still have to look to find. And you could say the same thing about a team like Baltimore, to be honest. They won a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco. But I look at Flacco and I'm like, you can do better, so why don't you look to move better? But that's my take. Scott, we started with Frank last time, so I know your thoughts on this.
What was the question?
It was essentially if, seeing the average quarterbacks that have made it this far, is Tyrod good enough that they can win if they improve in the holes around him, which we're going to use to transition to the next question as well?
Maybe.
We can skip it too. Maybe. We'll go with maybe. Frank, any thoughts?
I'd say, yeah, it could, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Like the point is to be there a lot. And, that's like you just said, Jacksonville got there and won a game, and these other two teams kind of won a game or two, and really like Minnesota won by the skin of their teeth. Jacksonville won by the skin of their teeth. By all rights, in a perfect world, neither one of those teams should have won and advanced. If you really look at the miracle that was in Minnesota and the, basically a turnover is the difference in the Pittsburgh-Jacksonville game. And, so could you do it? Sure. Like if they had scored another 8 points on Sunday, I wouldn't doubt that they could have done the same thing Jacksonville did, got lucky against Pittsburgh. But that's not how you want to do it. You want to be Pittsburgh, New England, Aaron Rodgers, and Green Bay, and basically be in every year, and then give yourself as many chances as you can, as opposed to having to capitalize this year. I will bet money now that these of the three non-Brady quarterbacks, at least two of them won't be in the playoffs next year.
Ooh,
yeah.
Good.
No, that's a bold pick.
It's a good call.
Yeah,
And
I like Frank's overall point here too, which, and I mentioned with Flacco in the Super Bowl, the teams that have the, Roethlisbergers, the Bradys, the Rodgers, and Rodgers wasn't healthy this year, they are mainstays in the divisional round of the playoffs at least every year. They pretty much get that far every year. You can't even say that about Baltimore. They're not even a consistent playoff team with Flacco. Even the year they won the Super Bowl, they were a 9-7 team. So, so now we're going to transition this because this boils down to, what Jasmine was getting at, what Steven had asked directly. They've got a lot of holes on the roster. Now, I've opened up overthecap.com on my computer, which means I will soon be Zooling, I'm sure. So just warn me when I do. But the Bills I put, they have only 25, what I quote is real players under contract. And I count the first player I don't count as a real player is Rod Streeter. Once you get to that point, when you're looking down the Bills list, it's a lot of guys on futures contracts, reserve guys. The only one below that is really Reed Ferguson, who will be on the roster as a long snapper. But otherwise, this is a thin team going into next year. They've got a lot of free agents to sign. So when we look at, and I'll leave it pretty open-ended, and we'll start with Frank on this one. You have so many players. You've got the Preston Browns, the EJ Gaines's, the Jordan Matthews, some guys, looking at the list of free agents, who do you look to retain? Who do you look to jettison? And then which holes, are you willing to get rid of? Because Deion Dawkins from do you look to part with Glenn for salary cap space, knowing that creates another hole on the offensive line that you have to fill that is not an easy hole? So just thoughts on what the Bills are going to do to try and, fill all these vacant spots.
To be honest, there are so many vacant spots, and I don't have the free agent list in front of me. I am not entirely sure how to answer this question.
That's all right. I can, we'll start with Scott, and I can, while you were doing that, I'll forward you the list. The Buffalo News had a good article on this, so I'll send that link along.
So I think if I'm thinking about how to construct this team, I guess based off what we said previously, we're drafting a quarterback. So the problem is going to be we're not going to get a lot of production out of the position. So do you want to either try and build up a really good offense around him that he's going to be able to kind of grow into it, or do you want to try and double down on the defense and build on a pretty good secondary to try and have that team be, you're going to try and win all your games 10-0, or you're going to try and win them, 20-10. And I feel like it's easier to win games 10-0, or at least design your team that way so that you can confidently say, like, as long as the quarterback doesn't, explode on the field, we'll have literally explode, not like figuratively explode. Then we'll have a chance to keep keep things going. So to me, that means you kind of have to start with you have to prioritize your defense, and you have to bring back guys who are parts of that defense who are key. So to me, like Kyle, I think gets to come back because he's Kyle. Like maybe not on production and salary, but if it was anybody else, like he, maybe not. But because he's Kyle, he gets to see the table if he wants one. After that, I think you look at guys like EJ Gaines, who you may want to come up with some sort of good incentive-laden contract to keep, because I think he's good enough to be your number 2 kind of cornerback on the field. Then after that, I'm not sure. I think Preston Brown, for me, I think he's okay, but I don't think he's good enough to be the pivot of the defense in this kind of to be this kind of dominant defense that we need this defense to be, and that I think they want to build. So I think the issue is you bring him back and you're kind of limiting how good you can be at linebacker. So I think you lose him, you lose Humber, and then you kind of got to start with Milano as your kind of returning linebacker. Maybe that's where you pick up a free agent, a good free agent linebacker along with someone in the draft to try and fill that hole. And then you also got to go back to the draft to try and get at least one edge rusher, if not a defensive tackle, either an edge rusher or a defensive tackle, because frankly, we need both.
There might be, I heard that, what's his name from Carolina, Star Lotulelei. Yes, thank you. He is a free agent this year. And so they might use him to address defensive tackle. Part of always is like who's available, right? Like part of this question is always, well, who can you replace him with? I like a lot of what Scott said. I think that a lot of the guys that you look at a guy like EJ Gaines, and when he was in the lineup, it was certainly a better defense than without him. But the problem was he wasn't always in the lineup. He was a lot of times not in the lineup. So, I still sort of struggle with this. Maybe I could file an amended brief later, Your Honor, and sort of get back to you on this. But I think that until they start kind of doing some stuff, and there are so many holes, it might really be. I think that the way you would approach it as a front office person in this team is, let's see what you can fix first. Let's see what becomes available, and then go from there. But I think a guy like Travaris Cadet is like a really safe, easy guy to re-sign. Like he's not going to cost nearly any money. He showed some nice flashes, and you're going to make sure you're going to need running backs. I don't really want to re-sign a guy like Humber. I don't really want to necessarily re-sign Cole Anderson. Jordan Matthews, I'm sure just hated his time here. Why would he ever want to come back? So, although possession receiver, maybe you could talk to him and say, hey, if you're going to be healthy, we'll see. Because this really was an anomaly this year for him in that regards. What about you, Paul? I'll let you sort of.
Yeah, sure. And this is, it's a rich topic, and we'll talk more about as we get deeper into free agency. But I generally, I definitely have points of agreement with both. I think Danny Crossman might disagree with Frank on re-signing Humber and Anderson, because those are two guys that contribute on special teams, but those are not guys you want on the defensive side of the ball. And the point can also be made that you can find, better players who are better depth on the defensive side of the ball, who can play special teams comparably well to Humber and Anderson, even if they don't play as well. Matthews, I think, jettisoning him is good. He wouldn't want to come back. I don't think it was a terrible season for him. He'll probably take a prove-it contract somewhere of 1 year to try and then get a big contract down the road, which I expect Sammy Watkins to also do, because he had a down year heading into his contract year. And I think with the Bills having, Zay Jones and Andre Holmes as potential slot receivers going forward, you don't need that many slot receivers in the lineup. As Scott mentioned, they really need to get better on the interior of the line. That includes both defensive tackle, where I think guys like Cedric Thornton are going to be let go, try to replace them with better players. If you look at their strategy last year, they just changed out their whole secondary, and it got better and cheaper. And that's the way to do it. So I'm not expecting them to find comparable players at defensive tackle and linebacker as they did at safety and corner last year, and bringing aboard EJ Gaines and then Poyer and Hyde. And Frank had referenced the difference with Gaines. The Bills were 8-3 when EJ Gaines was in the lineup in 2017, and 1-4 without him. So either you need to re-sign him, or you need to sign someone comparable to him, or you need to improve the depth that was behind him, so that if he does go out, or whoever is in that role goes out, you're in better shape. So I think Seantrel Henderson's going to be a risk because of his health issues. So you could look at him as depth, but he's not a starter. You got guys like Joe Webb. Yeah, I give him depending on the QB situation, I give him a raise to come back if you don't have a glut of people there because of how many times you get value out of your third quarterback. And the Bills got value out of their third quarterback every week because he also was able to do so much on special teams. So, and yeah, same with Cadet or Jones, whoever they go, if you can bring one of those guys back on a minimum, they can prove themselves as a number 2 guy. That at the very least saves you, you only have to go and get one running back. We haven't talked about Tolbert because we don't need to. He needs to be gone. As far as what they do with Preston Brown, he was the NFL's leading tackler, but there's a lot of problems with the run defense, and he fits into that. So we'll see what they end up doing. I think they might have someone who's a better idea for their scheme, but I trust the process. I trust Brandon Beane to make some moves that will be helpful to this roster, to find guys like Poyer and Hyde and Gaines that became major defensive contributors this year, and to find those guys, the defensive tackle and linebacker positions, and hopefully the wide receiver and some of the offensive line positions as well. So that's my thoughts on filling the holes in the lineup. So speaking of, and one of the players that factors into this on the offensive tackle as we transition is Cordy Glenn. How is his health situation going to be? Is that going to be another hole to fill? And I bring him up because he, along with Kelvin Benjamin and Zay Jones, are players that have had or are about to have, and I think they've all had the surgery now, various off-season surgeries. And the health of those 3 players definitely shapes what they're doing with some of those holes. Charles Clay, of note, also is not going to have off-season surgery. They're just going to let him rest after he had his procedure mid-season. We'll start with Frank on this topic to keep the rotation going. Of the 3 players who've had off-season surgeries, Kelvin Benjamin, Zay Jones, Cordy Glenn, which do you think is most key to be healthy going into the next season? I think there's arguments that can be made for all 3 of these guys.
Kelvin Benjamin, Zay Jones, and Cordy Glenn.
So you've got the main outside wide receiver. You've got a slot receiver who is a higher draft pick, and you've got a potential franchise left tackle, but who's also a big roster.
That's what I'm going with, because I can't really, until I know who the quarterback is, can't really say how important it is to have Zay Jones or Kelvin Benjamin be themselves, because I think the quarterback and the offensive coordinator are going to dictate the game, like who is a bigger weapon. But I think you're always going to need a left tackle, regardless of who the quarterback is. So, especially with, I don't think Richie Incognito is a free agent, but I mean, he's
got one more year. The 2019, right. Man, next year at this time, we're going to be having a lively discussion.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of good players going to free agency.
So the more good players, on that line that we can have healthy, the better. So I will say Cordy.
All right, Scott.
Say Cordy too, but part of me wonders, like, if this wasn't like Doug Whaley's last gift to Bills fans was like cursing us with like a left tackle who's good enough to be like a top 10 left tackle, but never actually so I could see that kind of, it's Cordy. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I think the timing of it is what's hilarious too. He signs Darius to a big contract, and then Darius starts being ineffective. Cordy Glenn had been largely healthy almost entirely his first 4 NFL seasons. And then if they signed a big deal, the last 2 years, he's been out of the lineup fairly consistently. I'm going to say Cordy as well, simply because, Zayza, earlier in his career, a slot receiver is important, but it's not at the level of a number 1 receiver or a left tackle. Kelvin, he's a good number 1, he's a good number 2 receiver. Is he a viable number 1? You don't really know. Until you get better personnel around him. And also, he's only under contract for 1 more season, so you've got to re-up him anyway. Cordy's under contract for the long haul, and the team will need to make a decision about whether he's going to be a franchise left tackle, and they can move Dion to the right tackle position, in which case you've solved a big problem. If Dawkins can be effective at right tackle and Cordy can be effective and healthy at left tackle. So Yeah, I think of the offseason surgeries of which ones improve the best, which ones, are the most key. That's the one, because I think the Bills would be foolish to move on from Courtney Glenn despite his high salary cap hit, because his cap number is, it's 14.4 this year, 12.4 the next year. It keeps going down, and it's for a top 10 left tackle. It's a good deal. But if he's not healthy or cannot return to the level of play he was at before then you have a serious decision to make about whether to try to trade him and get some value back in return, knowing that you're going to be paying more dead cap money like they've done with Darius, like they may be doing with Taylor, etc. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. It's definitely interesting. On to, non-footballish football news, and this is a very quick topic, but one that's worth mentioning. John Bon Jovi saying that it was Donald Trump who put out there that the Bills, and we'll move on to this quickly, he wouldn't have moved the Bills. That was Donald Trump planned that. Any thoughts on this? Do we stay away from this controversial topic?
I'm trying to think of a good Bon Jovi line to go out on, but no, I have nothing, and I don't.
Yeah, I got nothing either. I'm glad that the Bills are staying in Buffalo. There.
That's a good place to. Yeah,
there we go, and we'll say that. So I think this is going to be a non-story. It's a slow news filler, and we have a lot of news, so we'll move on from that topic in less than 1 minute. This day in Bills history. This is the one thing about rescheduling our podcast. I did a ton of research, which I'm going to do for this day in Bills history next week, on a situation that happened on January 18th, way back in 2001. That's not a football game. It certainly was prominent, and Lauren, it's an interesting story. But in the interest of time commitment, I will report on the one game in Bills history that happened on January 20th, 2018, because it was the AFC Championship. In 1991, the Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Raiders. And yes, I said Los Angeles Raiders, which is actually correct. Unlike when I say San Diego Chargers now, and I'm totally incorrect. But they were the Los Angeles Raiders at that point in time. This is the only game that's ever happened for the Bills on January 20th. And the story in that. What was, there's a good article in the LA Times if you like to, if you're Freudianistic, like we are, and like to dwell on other people's misery. And it mainly dwells on the misery of the Raiders. Defensive end Howie Long saying, I don't think anybody could have stopped them. By the way, the Bills won this game 51-3, for those of you who do not know your Bills history. They were totally unstoppable this day. They're up 48-3 at halftime in this game. And the Raiders had to call timeout on the Bills' very first drive after they'd run 5 plays, because they couldn't figure out how to stop them after the Bills had gained 12 yards, 14 yards, 15 yards, 5 yards, and 9 yards on the first 5 plays of the game, and the Raiders were all winded. So, it was one of the greatest opening acts ever, is how it was referred to in an article. I'm hoping that siren goes by quickly. It seems to be passing. Howie Long said, I don't think anyone could have stopped him. He could have brought back the steel curtain, and it wouldn't have mattered. Defensive end, or Jay Schrader said, obviously the ball didn't go where he wanted to go on some of his interceptions. Lionel Washington was crying after giving up 5 catches for 113 yards to former teammate James Lofton, who the Raiders had cut the year before. Washington said, I couldn't cover him, tears in my eyes. I don't blame myself, but I played a big part of the game. I couldn't come up with the big plays to stop him. You've got to take it personally sometimes. The game was over at the half. In 2 quarters, the Bills had 387 yards. Thomas had rushed for 109 yards. Kelly had thrown for 247. They were all pulled by the fourth quarter. Marcus Allen said, a game like today is an education. You can talk a hell of a lot about being ready and focused. It's difficult to explain, but there are these other intangibles. When the level rises, you've got to be ready for it. The Raiders were not. So Greg Bell, who hadn't played since October 14th, worked mop-up duty in the fourth quarter and ended up being the Raiders' leading rusher with 36 yards, and reserve quarterback Vince Evans was a close second with 33. What stood out to me when I looked at the box score of this game, Bills running backs and fullbacks, 5 of them had carries in this game. The Bills don't even usually keep more than 3 running backs and fullbacks active on game day nowadays. They had 5. Thomas Carwell Gardner, who had a carry for 23 yards that I don't remember, Davis, Jamie Mueller, and Don Smith all had carries. I remember Kenneth Davis having a great day because he had 3 TDs, but only 10 carries for 21 yards. So I didn't remember he was largely ineffective. Thomas had 138 on 25 and 3/4. Kelly 3 for 300 yards. So all in all, a complete day. Any thoughts on this? It was a historic game. It's one that I watched on Halloween with some friends about 10 years ago, just because it is probably the most uplifting game, one of the most uplifting games in Bills history.
Sounds good.
Right, I have no memories of this game. I don't. I'm not sure if I watched it or not.
All right. Yeah, this would have been right before the time where Scott, it has been the week before Scott got to watch the Super Bowl that made him sympathetic to our
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I may have watched it because my dad
Right.
probably would have been watching it anyway, but just don't remember.
Right. So as far as the trivia question in this game, I'll have to switch it up because, again, my original trivia question was about the issue I was going to cover, which I'll cover next week. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to make it what I'll do, because I don't like you guys to cheat on the box scores, which is so easy. And I think the reason Scott gets it right every week is because he cheats on the box scores. If I ask,
that's half the allegation there.
How dare you? How dare
I know.
Sir.
Sorry.
Sir.
Shouldn't even put that out
Sir.
there. So there is a fairly legendary Raiders player. He had already at this point played 12 years in the league. He would play one more. He was a multiple-time first-team All-Pro, both by the AP and PFWA. He was nearing the end of his professional career at this point. He did score 2 touchdowns during his career. He had 14 sacks, during the course of his career. When he was asked about this game, what happened to the Raiders, he says, hey, some teams never got to this point. The only team that feels good in the offseason is the Super Bowl champion, but the last game is the one you're going to remember in the offseason. And it said, simply don't remind him because this game did not go as planned. So this Raider, who'd been in the league a long time, started this game, but was nearing the end of his tenure and was definitely disappointed to not get one more chance to play in the Super Bowl. Can you name this Raiders starter who had this put in perspective yet depressing quote?
I think it's Jim Kelly.
Kelly. Oh, bold guess.
Yeah.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off.
Okay. I'm going to go with, so it was a Raiders starter.
Yep.
I think I'm going to go with Kenemet Neferhedjet.
Which one?
Kenemet Nefer. That's such a good point. I think it was Kenemet Neferhedjet the first, because I think it was a her. By the way, you remember, of course, Frank. 'Cause that was when we let Egyptian queens play, but not Egyptian kings.
Right.
And I think her daughter went on to play for the Chiefs, and then I think she was
her with Kenemet Neferhedjet, daughter of Amenemhat II. But
yeah, that may. Well, I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's Kenemet Neferhedjet the first, but I mean,
Okay.
Paul, Paul knows it off the top of his head. Like that's the people don't know. He knows it off the top of his head. These trivia questions usually.
It's funny. I couldn't even. My spelling was so bad. Wikipedia had no clue what I was trying to do, nor did Google. They had no clue who I was trying to look up on this one. They just looked at Neferhedjet and just it was bad. So it may be. I don't know again because we've talked about
the English translation may be different. I'm using the Egyptian name. The English translation may be different.
Right. So if that's correct, the English translation of this name would be Jerry Robinson.
Yeah. Sure.
There's a great player in Tecmo Bowl, not Tecmo Super Bowl, mind you, because by that point his skills had diminished. But in the Tecmo Bowl era, the original game, he was always intercepting passes for the Raiders. He was started left linebacker that game. He didn't still show up on the stat sheet that I saw. He might have had some tackles. I didn't look at the tackles in this game because he was a linebacker, and linebackers are always tackling people. That's what they do, as we talked about earlier. But yeah, he was, he was the starting left linebacker this game. He started his career with Philly. He, was on the All-Pro team in 1981. He was an Egyptian queen several centuries before that. That must be it then. Scott must be right.
I remember the story because he had lobbied to have the hieroglyphics of his name on the back of his jersey, which of course is a picture like a water pitcher, followed by a little circle with a cross on top, followed by the long queen hat that is typical on people's heads. But they wouldn't let him because, and then that's why, that was one of the first things the XFL did when it came around, was you could have whatever you wanted on the back of your jersey.
Yeah. So that's
pyramid, funny bird, pyramid, cross, circle.
This is reminding me. I used to wear a shirt that had hieroglyphics on it, and I ran into an Egyptian guy, and he looked at my shirt and said, "Hey, your shirt is total nonsense." Like it literally means like Doug and mug. It was like it was the most random thing. I'm like, damn, because there's a shirt for a band called Universal Honey, local band in the Buffalo area, and I thought it just meant Universal Honey, but no, it was just random.
That's actually the answer to next week's trivia question, is Universal.
Yes, damn, we're ahead of the game. So before we wrap up, we should talk quickly about the games from last weekend. What's coming up this weekend? The only one, but I think we just have to talk about, two things. Which I don't feel like talking about New England or Philadelphia. I think those were both, the Philadelphia one was mildly surprising only because, they had, they were in the backup quarterback situation, but they were still home team. New England, not surprising at all. Dominant victory is expected. Jacksonville over Pittsburgh, that, I shouldn't say surprising. They'd gone to Pittsburgh 139, but certainly it woke up a lot of people who thought that it was flukish that they'd beaten Pittsburgh earlier this year and that Jacksonville didn't have the horses to get this far. And then obviously that Minnesota-New Orleans game, wow, that was something else. And I know, Frank, you didn't see the end of that because I saw on Twitter later, like, oh, wow, I would have loved to see that live. I have no horse in that race. I was probably slightly rooting for New Orleans only because my brother-in-law is a Saints fan. But I actually stood up when it happened, like, oh, my God, the only walk-off touchdown in NFL history. Any thoughts on the playoff games from this past weekend?
I didn't watch very many of them. I was busy at Daniel Tiger Live here in Washington,
Oh,
DC.
That's right. You were blocks from us, and I thought, like, oh, we should invite them out for drinks afterwards. And that's like, no, that's right. They have a child with them.
We do, and we went to Elephant and Castle, and it was way past bedtime, as Scott might appreciate. But he was riding high, and she had a great time. And all in all was like actually pretty good at bedtime, considering, we were like at the restaurant when normally we're like reading books to relax. But she was like a full hour late, no bath, no problem.
Wow.
Really liked Daniel Tiger Live. All your favorites were there.
That's good. I remember asking Susan on Facebook about, that was my favorite.
O was there, but not X. There was a lot of like, my mommy's off stage. I have to go see her now. And like that person was never there.
Okay.
Interesting choice, of course, to have Daniel Tiger as the only fully faced member with like a full cartoon face. All the other characters had like a head but then you could see like the real person face. But
I don't like that.
It made no difference to Evelyn, who for the first half was like sort of like figuring it all out, and then an intermission in the second half was like fully invested 100%. So those are my thoughts on the 4 games this weekend.
Yeah, no, that was a good summary of the playoffs. Scott, is your summary similar?
No, I mean, I did watch. Well, yeah, I mean, we did watch a lot of Paw Patrol, I think, probably last weekend. We'll get into that on our Paw Patrol podcast, maybe next pup. But
right. Maybe next pup.
I did watch a lot of actually the Jacksonville Pittsburgh game. That was kind of wild. Like that was a really pretty good game. And then I wanted to watch the Saints Vikings game, but I didn't get a chance. And then I was able to turn in for literally the last 5 minutes, and I was like, oh my God, like this is the best game in the history of mankind. Like it was pretty wild because it was like the Vikings have the huge lead and they blow it. Like I saw the block punt that the Saints got, and I'm like, oh, there's the Vikings. They're like the Bills, except they play in the NFC North. Like that's how they lose this game. Like I saw Drew Brees complete one pass, and I'm like, oh, he's definitely scoring. So I turned it off for 2 minutes, and I went and did something. I came back, and then they had already scored, and I'm like, yep, Saints are up now. And then I was like, oh, the Vikings are playing this too conservative. They were moving. This was when they were down by 1, and they ended up settling for like a 54-yard field goal. And I'm like, because like they got in like 55-yard field goal range, and even though it's indoors, they suddenly started like they were treating it like it was a 40-yarder, and they needed to just sit on it and play conservative. And I was like, that's going to backfire, but it didn't. They kicked it, but then they left a minute and a half left still for Breeze to go down, score the field goal, and then I did watch live when the miracle happened, and that was just like I don't think I did not scream as loud as I did in the Bills game, obviously, or the Bengals game more importantly. But it was there was an audible gasp from myself when that happened, because that was that's a tough way to lose if you're the Saints, and that is pretty. Yeah, I mean, the Vikings, obviously they got the Super Bowl at home, so I'm sure they're thinking they got it. But if they go into the offseason with that as the best moment of their season, that's going to be pretty tough to beat, frankly.
Yeah, no, that would be something. So yeah, so this weekend, the championship games: Jacksonville visiting New England, Minnesota visiting Philadelphia, and we'll head right back to you, Scott, because if Minnesota wins this, they're going to host the Super Bowl, if you will. In Jacksonville, New England, we expect it to be a New England domination, but after the playoffs routine, anything can happen.
I think Minnesota. I mean, obviously Minnesota. I mean, well, okay. So
the game is in Philly, by the way, just to clarify.
Yeah, just to clarify. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's. I mean, if it was in Minnesota, I think Minnesota's a lock. I think I would have had the Falcons in the game last week, and the Eagles were able to kind of you literally kick 5 field goals to win the game. I don't know. That's the thing. I think they could probably kick 5 field goals, and I don't know that Minnesota.
Look at these two defenses. I mean, that could happen.
So I guess I'm gonna have to go with Philly, but I am gonna be rooting for Minnesota, and then in the other game.
Gotta rep the conference.
Yeah. I don't feel great about it. The other game, Jacksonville, I've been telling everyone this week, like a number of people talked to me about this game for some reason, and I've been saying, like, if it was anybody other New England, like if you even took all the players on New England and you put them in like Pittsburgh or some other AFC team,
Honolulu, like invent the city.
Exactly. And Jacksonville had to play the same team members, but they weren't the New England Patriots. I would pick them, and like there was no history of what New England has done. I would pick Jacksonville because I think the matchups are all in their favor. Like they've got a fantastic defense that can keep Brady off the field. They've got guys who can cover Gronkowski. They can score enough points against a banged up kind of New England defense that isn't what it was. Like Brady's freaking, who knows what's, he's going to have his thumb in a cast or something. But I can't. I still can't. I can't do it. I can't. I will be rooting for Jacksonville, with all my heart, but I cannot pick them to win that game.
All right, Frank.
Yeah, no, I can't decide if I'm more upset by the Patriots going to the Super Bowl or Doug Marrone going to the Super Bowl.
I mean,
Doug, now in Frank's defense, Doug Marrone did just take $4 million from the Bills organization to leave and abandon them after a 9-7 season. So I understand that point of view, but I also am kind of by deep-rooted hatred of everything that the Patriots have caused in terms of pain of the Bills and other teams of the last few years definitely supersedes it.
I just also, there is some part of me that still doesn't really believe in Jacksonville. I mean, I'm hedging here because I can't really say that for sure. After last week, I don't want to say for sure that they can beat New England. It's not 100%, but it's probably like 85% that I would pick New England to win the game. But like, I still think it's a middling team, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if this exact Jacksonville team went 7-9 next year, and just like played different teams and got beat and didn't make the playoffs. I don't think they're a great football team. They have a very good defense. Scott's right. That side of the ball is a very matchup for the Patriots in that they can create pressure without having to blitz and etc. But I don't know that if they had to play not in the AFC South that they would have done very well. So I'm going to take New England. I think it's not the lesser of two evils, but it's the evil I'm used to enduring. And in the other game, I think Scott's right. Like this game could be 12-9, and I'm not sure who has 12 and who has 9. So I'm going to be rooting for the Eagles because my friend who is a neighbor is an Eagles fan, and so I will be rooting for them in this case, but not with any sort of real fervor. Although the only good thing about Jacksonville making it, but again, it would be credited to Doug Marrone, is that a new person would win the Super Bowl. So all you need is Jacksonville to make it. Jacksonville makes it, you're going to add a team to the pantheon of Super Bowl winners, which I like. I know some people don't like because it's like, well, the Bills haven't won, so
yeah, there's technically a 3/4 chance of a new first-time Super Bowl champion this year,
but not really. I mean, it's really like a at best,
mathematically, you're correct.
Right. There's a 3/4 probability or odds, but not probability.
Right.
Or
and after tomorrow, that'll be either 50% or 100%.
Right. So we'll have to go to the NYT playoffs calculator to see all the scenarios.
Yeah.
All 4 scenario possibilities.
I'd love to give a dissent. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm done. No, I'm done.
Yeah, I'd love to give a dissent opinion, but I pretty much agree with you both, and I almost agree perfectly with Scott Albee. I think the Eagles, it's going to be just field goals back and forth in that game. I think there's going to be some scoring. You have 2 not great quarterbacks. So Keenum was a better performer throughout the year than Foles showed his last few weeks of the regular season when he filled in for Wentz. But I think Philly's got the home field advantage. I think they're a very strong team. They've already beaten Minnesota this year, if I recall. So I'm going to say Philly in that game. And then I think, which Jacksonville team are we going to get? And Frank alludes this to that. If you had seen the Jacksonville team that beat Buffalo 2 weeks ago, you'd say New England will destroy this team. And then if you see the one that went to Pittsburgh last week and dominated Pittsburgh for one half of football before the second half got a little crazier, but still managed to finish them off and prevented Pittsburgh from ever fully coming back to tie that game or take a lead, you would say, oh, they have a legitimate chance because of all the matchup advantages that Scott mentioned earlier. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between, and I think the Patriots, just with the experience factor, they've been there before, but I think it's going to be the Patriots in this as well. We're going to be talking about a Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl rematch from about 15 years ago or so when it was McNabb versus Brady back in the day, and Terrell Owens was an Eagle. That was a long time ago. But anyway, so yeah, that'll be what we talk about in the podcast either next week or the week after. For those of you who don't know, we had one bye week when the Bills took their bye week, but for 5.5 months, we have gone nonstop on this podcast. So we'll take probably a week off, if not this week, the week after, but we'll have one more pod before the Super Bowl with our Super Bowl predictions, recap of the AFC title game, and then focusing on any Bills news that happens in that time. So it could be there's a lot that can happen. There's also nothing that can happen. I looked over past headlines from this time of year. So we could have another 90. We could have a 90-minute podcast or a 45-minute podcast. We'll see how it goes. But in the meantime, on any news, I'll be tweeting a little bit during the games tomorrow, I'm sure. You can find Paul at twitter.com/bbillsmny. Scott handles the Facebook page, facebook.com/bbillsmny. Yeah, and sometimes Frank will chime in with comments as well. You can find us on iTunes, of course. You can find us on our page, WordPress page, but we're not going to really do much on that page. But we'll do more on that page when we have our Gmail address. But you can email us if you want at bbillsmny@gmail.com, and we'll get that email between now and 2019, as I often joke. So until then, any final thoughts from you guys?
No, have a nice weekend, everybody. Well, depending on when this gets posted, have a nice day or week.
Yes. So thanks to Frank he's going to do yeoman's work in editing this as he did last week because, we seem to have challenges week after week. But we'll be on our game next week and or the week after that. But until then, enjoy the championship games, everyone. Go Bills. And this is Paul.
I'm Scott.
I'm Frank.
See you guys next time.